The scent of sharpened pencils and lemon-scented floor polish mingled in the air as Lily Gwyn fidgeted in her seat, her notebook clutched to her chest like a shield. Maplewood Elementary's Assembly Hall was a kaleidoscope of childhood energy. Students in plaid uniforms whispered secrets behind cupped hands. A boy in the front row blew bubbles with his gum, and golden sunlight streamed through tall windows streaked with finger-painted doves. Rows of folding chairs creaked under restless bodies, while a faint buzz of the PA system hovered like a curious insect. At the back of the room, Omar Hassan sat hunched over his desk, sketching a crumbling building crowned with broken smokestacks. He added dusty vines creeping up its walls, half-erased lines that suggested bullet holes or shrapnel scars. For Omar, the drawing was both a memory and a prayer. His father, a doctor, had been trapped in Aleppo for 6 months, and each pencil stroke felt like a lifeline connecting him to home. A stirring near the stage caught Lily's attention. Principal Harris, a tall, angular man whose bald head perpetually glistened with nervous sweat, stood at the microphone, clearing his throat. His voice boomed across the hall as he announced the day's special guest, and a hush descended like a theater curtain. "She's here," someone whispered with a mix of awe and curiosity. Melania Trump entered, her cream pantsuit immaculate, her heels clicking softly against the linoleum. She offered a gentle smile to the children, an expression that carried both poise and something more vulnerable beneath it. Principal Harris extended a trembling handshake. Standing beside him, Ms. Rivera, the school's vibrant and devoted teacher, gestured to a display board covered in crayon drawings, watercolor paintings, and short essays. Each piece was pinned carefully, forming a patchwork of heartfelt expressions. "These essays are about kindness," Principal Harris explained, mopping his forehead with a paisley handkerchief. "Our students worked incredibly hard, drawing from personal experiences and family stories." Lily's essay, "Why My Grandma's Soup Tastes Like Peace," hung near the top, slightly crooked. She'd written about her grandmother, Tao, who had fed starving neighbors during the fall of Saigon, stirring faux GA in a dented pot while helicopters roared overhead. The taste of that soup, Lily believed, transcended the bitterness of war. Yet on this particular day, Lily's mind wasn't on soup. She was preoccupied with a question, one that had twisted in her gut like an uneasy knot since Omar first confided in her about his father. During the Q&A session, a boy named Tommy Wilson stood and asked about Melania's favorite dessert. "Vanilla ice cream with borovness," she replied, her Slovenian accent rounding the vowels gently. "Wild blueberries from my homeland." Laughter rippled through the hall, and for a moment, the atmosphere felt almost festive. Then Lily took a shaky breath and stood. Her small voice carried through the silence. "Mrs. Trump, how do we stop all the wars?" She glanced over at Omar. "My friend's dad is stuck in Syria, and my grandma says wars follow people like shadows. Can kids even do anything?" All around, children fidgeted. Some looked down at their shoes. Others stared at Lily with wide eyes, as if she had tossed a live spark into the middle of the room. Melania's polished smile wavered. She descended the few steps leading off the stage, then sat cross-legged on the floor, so she was eye level with Lily and the other students. The hush that fell over the assembly hall was profound. Everyone, from the teachers in the back row to the janitor peeking in through the door, seemed to hold their breath. "When I was your age," Melania began slowly, "I hid under my bed during thunderstorms. My father would say, 'Fear is loud, but courage is quieter. Listen for it.'" Her gaze swept the crowd, lingering on Omar, then settling back on Lily. She took a small, carved wooden sparrow out of her coat pocket, its wings smooth and shiny from years of handling. "Children can do many things," she continued. "Sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest truths." Omar's hand paused mid-sketch. He locked eyes with Melania, and in that moment, it felt as if there were no reporters, no grown-ups, no boundaries, just a shared understanding that war had touched them both, differently but deeply. Sevnica, Slovenia, 1943, a village under occupation. Before Melania Trump was a name known around the world, before she posed in runway shows under bright lights, there was Viktor Novs, her father. His story began in the rolling hills of Sevnica, a Slovenian town that curled around the Sava River like a contented cat. The village was a tapestry of cobblestone streets, terracotta rooftops, and fruit orchards. On early mornings, the mist clung to the apple trees, and villagers woke to the distant toll of the church bell. Life's simple rhythms in an otherwise perilous era. In the autumn of 1943, Sevnica's peace unraveled. Slovenia was under Axis occupation, divided among fascist powers and riddled with conflict. Nazi patrols in polished boots roamed the roads, while partisan fighters took to the forests and mountains, their faces hollow from hunger but lit by grim resolve. The townspeople endured a constant undercurrent of dread, each morning bringing rumors of midnight arrests or ambushes in the woods. For 6-year-old Viktor, war was both invisible and everywhere. He felt it in the hush that fell when adults whispered about the Germans or the partisans. He saw it in the way his mother, Marjana, clutched her rosary beads so tightly her knuckles turned white. He heard it in the nervous laughter that died too quickly at the market stalls when uniformed soldiers strolled past. Viktor's father, Alesh, was a carpenter whose skill with a chisel was legendary. He could carve ornate roses into a solid oak table or shape a cradle that rocked as if cradling hope itself. On the nights he was home, Alesh would ruffle Viktor's hair and whisper, "We must protect beauty, no matter the cost." Viktor, not fully understanding, would nod solemnly and hug his father's leg. The night the partisans came. It was a moonless evening in October when urgent knocks shattered the silence of the Novs household. Marjana appeared outside to find 3 partisan fighters, mud streaked across their tattered uniforms, desperation etched on their gaunt faces. One of them, a former schoolteacher named Jur, clutched a bloody rag around his arm. "Prosim," he gasped, sweat beading on his brow. "They're right behind us." Marjana led them up the narrow staircase to the attic. Beneath a loose floorboard and a threadbare rug lay a hidden space not much larger than a closet. Viktor watched from behind the banister, heart thudding so loudly he was sure it would give them away. His mother placed a trembling finger to her lips, not a sound. Moments later, German motorcycles rumbled into the yard, headlights splashing across the windows like searchlights. The door burst open, and uniformed men stomped into the house. The officer in charge, a gaunt figure with a scar running down one cheek, barked in harsh German. Marjana responded calmly in the little German she knew, insisting she had seen no one. The officer's eyes swept the room and landed on Viktor, who stood frozen in the corner. "Calm her," the man barked, then seized Viktor by the collar and roughly shoved him into a cramped cupboard beneath the stairs. The door slammed shut, plunging him into darkness. Inside the suffocating blackness, Viktor could hear the crash of furniture and the screech of splintering wood as the Nazis searched the house. He pressed his hands over his ears, but the brutality outside seeped through, muffled shouts, his mother's protests, the slam of rifle butts against fragile objects, or perhaps people. Fear coiled in Viktor's stomach, and tears ran down his cheeks. Yet, somewhere in his mind, he clung to his father's words about protecting beauty, even if beauty was simply his mother's courage or the memory of an apple orchard in sunlight. When the soldiers finally left, the house was in ruins. Cabinets lay smashed, food scattered across the floor, as if by a hurricane. Viktor emerged shakily from the cupboard, calling for his mother. She was gone, dragged away like so many others suspected of aiding the partisans. The shadows on the walls flickered, cast by the lantern that had been knocked to the floor. Days blurred into each other. Neighbors whispered that Marjana had been taken to a holding facility for questioning. Some said the Nazis deported her to a labor camp. No one knew for sure. What they did know was that children who lost their parents often ended up in state-run homes or worse. Alesh, also missing, was rumored to have joined a guerrilla band in the mountains. Nobody dared confirm it aloud. Eventually, relatives in Ljubljana took Victor in, along with his baby sister, Nada. But Ljubljana was no safer, a city turned skeleton by bombings and occupation. Ration lines snaked through rubble-strewn streets, and the children's dreams were haunted by sirens and ghostly silhouettes in uniform. Every day, Victor thought of Sevnica and wondered if the orchard still blossomed, if the Sava River still whispered under the willows, if his mother might miraculously return. Ljubljana, 1945, the carpenter's workshop. The war ended, but it left scars that took far longer to heal. Buildings in Ljubljana stood half-collapsed like broken teeth. Food was scarce, and people moved through the streets with hollow stares. Victor, now 8, spent his days scavenging for scraps, rummaging through charred ruins in search of anything salvageable. Some days, he found a morsel of bread or a scrap of metal to trade for onions in the market. Other days, he found only ashes. Then one gray afternoon, he followed the scent of fresh sawdust to a cramped alley. An old man, Lodge Kovac, was bent over a warped plank, a chisel in his hand. Victor watched from the doorway, entranced by the patient, rhythmic tap-tap of the mallet. Intricate wood shavings curled from the plank like ribbons. "Come inside," Lodge said without looking up. His voice carried a warmth that startled Victor. He had grown accustomed to the bark of soldiers and the hollow murmurs of despair. "You're cold, aren't you?" Victor nodded and stepped forward, his heart hammering. The workshop was cluttered with half-finished chairs, carved table legs, and bowls of mismatched nails. A small stove in the corner glowed with welcome heat. Lodge handed Victor a steaming mug of thin broth. Though it was scarcely more than flavored water, to Victor it tasted like a banquet. Lodge explained in hushed tones that he'd lost his only son in the war. "He was about your age when it started," the old man said, eyes moist. "Now, I carved to remember him." For a moment, Victor could only stare at the floor. In Lodge's sorrow, he recognized his own, an aching hole that might never be filled. Then, as if on impulse, Lodge shoved a small chunk of pine into Victor's hands. "Carve," he said. I don't know how," Victor stammered. "Start," replied Lodge, his tone firm but kind. "A good way to keep going is to make something new." Though Victor's first attempts were clumsy, Lodge guided his hands until a rough shape emerged. A bird, its wings outstretched. Victor sanded the edges carefully, and with each stroke of the sandpaper, he imagined hope might be taking shape too. Ljubljana, 1947, a mother's return. In the small room where Victor Novs slept on a straw mattress, everything felt painted in shades of gray. The windows were draped in rags to keep the cold out, and the flickering oil lamp cast shadows that danced across the walls. Aunt Annika, his caretaker, was a stern woman who believed life demanded strict discipline. Her late husband's execution by the occupiers had hardened her heart. Grief made her words clipped and her gestures abrupt. Victor spent his days running errands, bartering scrap metal for bread, or standing in line for water. Yet, at night, he would cradle the wooden bird he'd carved, his sparrow of hope, and recall Lodge's words, "Start something new." Then came a brisk afternoon in 1947. A knock sounded at Aunt Annika's door. When Annika opened it, she let out a small, strangled cry. There stood Marjana, Victor's mother, thin as a reed, her hair whitened prematurely, her cheeks hollow. Victor, now almost 10, stared at her wide-eyed, afraid to move or speak, as though she might disappear like an apparition. "Mama," he managed, his voice trembling. She stretched out her arms, and he launched himself toward her, relief crashing over him in waves. No one knew precisely how Marjana had survived. Rumors suggested she'd been forced to sew uniforms in a German labor camp, narrowly avoiding deportation to a far more brutal place. She never spoke of it in detail. Her eyes told enough of the story. Eyes that had witnessed humanity at its darkest, then somehow returned to illuminate her son's world once more. Yet their reunion was bittersweet. Ljubljana was still war-torn, ration lines still stretched long, and Aunt Annika seemed oddly resentful. "You're back," she muttered, turning away, as if Marjana's resurrection from tragedy was a reminder of everything she herself had lost. Within weeks, Marjana decided to return to Sevnica. And so, Victor found himself gazing out the window of a rattling truck filled with returning refugees and battered suitcases. He clutched his Sparrow carving tightly, wondering if the orchard at home still bore fruit, if the morning sun would still melt the mist along the Sava River. When they finally reached Sevnica, Victor felt both joy and sorrow. The farm he remembered, a place of laughter and the sweet smell of apple blossoms, had become a husk of its former self. The roof sagged, the fields were choked with weeds. Together, Marjana and Victor cleared debris, hammering salvage boards over broken windows. Neighbors helped when they could, sharing stories of who had vanished and who had miraculously survived. Marjana's nightly routine was the same. She'd whisper a short prayer, then tuck Victor into a modest cot by the warm stove. Sometimes, in the silence, Victor would hear her crying. He would lie awake, staring at the moonlit rafters, the carved sparrow beside him. He wished he could lend her some of its hope. He would replay the memory of her return, her frail arms, the tenderness in her voice, reminding himself that miracles, though rare, were not impossible. One brisk morning, as Victor was gathering firewood by the orchard, he spotted a stranger trudging along the dirt path. The man wore a patched coat, and his gait was slow, as if every step carried a burden of loss. A satchel hung from his shoulder. When he drew closer, Victor saw that the satchel bulged with thick rolls of paper. "Hello," Victor ventured timidly. The man lifted his head, revealing tired eyes. He introduced himself as Milan, a traveling sign painter. He had once roamed Slovenia painting shop signs and church frescoes. But the war had turned him into something else, a wanderer who exchanged small works of art for food and shelter. Victor fetched Marjana, and she offered Milan a warm bowl of thin soup. Grateful, he spread out some of his sketches across the kitchen table. One showed a crumbling bell tower against a stormy sky. Another depicted a phoenix rising from blackened ruins, a symbol of resilience. Marjana's eyes shone as she admired the colors, deftly applied with watercolors salvaged from who knew where. Milan, noticing Victor's carved sparrow, smiled. "That's a delicate piece. Did you make it?" Victor nodded. "A friend taught me." Milan produced a tiny paintbrush from his coat. "May I?" At Victor's hesitant nod, he dabbed a drop of green onto the sparrow's wings, painting them to resemble newly sprouted leaves. "So it can carry springtime wherever it flies," he said. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, Victor felt a swell of warmth. He had witnessed enough cruelty to fill a lifetime, yet here was a kindness. And kindness, as he was learning, could be just as powerful as any weapon, perhaps more so. Manhattan, decades later. The years tumbled forward. Victor grew into a man, met Amalija, and had daughters of his own, Ines and Melania. When Melania Novs eventually found her way to New York, the carved sparrow, still bearing the hint of green, came with her. She kept it tucked away like a relic that anchored her to a past she half understood but fully cherished. Now Melania Trump stood in the hush of her private study in Manhattan, early evening light slanting through tall windows. Stacks of letters and printed emails covered the mahogany desk. Some were from supporters, some from critics, and some from children who wrote about the simplest things, favorite books, concerns about the environment, or anxiety over conflicts they barely comprehended. She sighed, sinking into a leather chair. It had been a long day of public appearances and endless political chatter. The world, she thought, was far more complicated than the orchard her father once described, or the hidden workshop where a kind carpenter had taught him to carve. She turned a letter over in her hands. It was from a little girl in Pennsylvania, Lillian Gwynn. "Dear Mrs. Trump, thank you for answering my question at my school. I still wonder if it's even possible for kids like us to stop wars. My grandma always said we can if we share our stories and our food. I don't know if that's enough, but I hope it is. Lily." Melania closed her eyes, recalling the day she visited Maplewood Elementary. Lily's earnest question, "How do we stop all the wars?" still echoed in her mind. That question had stirred up memories of her father's stories about Sevnica under occupation, about the courage of small acts. She fiddled with the sparrow, now resting beside her laptop. The delicate bird still bore the faint paint of green wings from Milan's brush. Could something so small, like a bird or a child's essay, truly shift the tide of conflict? Her father believed in the power of stories. He used to tell her, words are carved deeper than wood. As Melania pondered, her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. The caller ID read, Maplewood Elementary. Intrigued, she answered. Hello, she said. Mrs. Trump? Came the voice of Principal Harris, sounding slightly breathless. I apologize for reaching out so suddenly, but I wanted to share something remarkable. Our students have started a letter-writing campaign, and Lily is at the center of it. She and another student, Omar Hassan, have been collecting letters for children in refugee camps. Melania's heart gave a little leap. Refugee camps. Yes, Principal Harris continued. They've sent letters and drawings to nonprofits that deliver art supplies and messages to displaced kids overseas. The students call them Sparrow Letters. They even fold origami birds to go with each envelope. It's become quite a movement in the school. We've had local news reporters visit. A flurry of images crowded Melania's mind. Omar's father, trapped in Aleppo, Lily's grandmother, who had also fled war-torn Vietnam, and her own father's stories of World War II Slovenia. Different times, different lands, yet the same shadow of violence. And now, in a small American town, children were rising up in their own small way. Principal Harris cleared his throat. Lily insisted I call you. She said you'd understand. Melania recalled Lily's determined little face. She realized that this was more than a gesture. It was a living thread connecting their stories. Thank you, Principal Harris, she said softly. I would love to help. Hanging up, she gazed at the wooden sparrow on her desk. Sparrow Letters. The idea already danced in her mind. Could she facilitate something bigger? Something that tied her father's legacy to Lily's quest? She opened her laptop, typed a quick message to her personal assistant. Within minutes, the plan was in motion. She'd invite Lily and Omar to a special event in New York, maybe even encourage them to expand the Sparrow Letters campaign. The details were hazy, but the intention was clear. In the quiet of the evening, she emailed Maplewood Elementary, copying Ms. Rivera and Principal Harris. Then she placed the sparrow in a small velvet pouch, one she had once used to store jewelry. It's time to pass on this piece of hope, she thought. Meanwhile, in Maplewood, while Melania typed her emails, Maplewood Elementary buzzed with an energy never seen before. Posters adorned the hallways, hand-drawn sparrows, messages of peace in multiple languages, and cartoons illustrating how to fold origami birds. The cafeteria hummed with chatter about the letters being sent abroad. Lily Gwynn found herself at the epicenter of this activity, though she didn't seek the spotlight. She just wanted to do something, anything, to help Omar feel less alone. She remembered how vulnerable he looked the day he told her his father was trapped in Aleppo, operating on injured neighbors in a makeshift clinic. She remembered how helpless she felt, hearing her grandma's stories of the Vietnam War and wondering if war was truly unstoppable. Now, she and Omar gathered letters from each classroom, stuffing them into large manila envelopes. We have more than 300 letters, Omar exclaimed, amazement lighting up his usually solemn features. Syria, Somalia, Ukraine. Ms. Rivera is going to contact NGOs that can distribute them. Imagine if they write back, Lily whispered, eyes shining. Letters flying across the world like sparrows. Omar offered a timid smile. He had begun adding bright swirls of color to his drawings, no longer painting only bombed-out buildings and smoke. Instead, his latest masterpiece showed a phoenix rising from a mosaic of flags. They took the letters to Ms. Rivera's classroom, where a group of volunteers turned them into neat packages. Ms. Rivera herself supervised, a glint of pride in her eyes. Just think, she told them. Somewhere, a child your age will read these words and realize they're not alone. In that moment, Lily realized how much those words mattered. Not alone, If war followed people like a shadow, maybe compassion could follow them like sunshine. Maplewood Elementary, after school. It was late afternoon, and the sun cast warm, elongated shadows through the windows of Ms. Rivera's classroom. The final bell had rung an hour ago, but Lillian Gwynn and Omar Hassan remained at their desks, carefully bundling the latest wave of Sparrow Letters. Doodles of flying birds and peace symbols decorated the envelopes, each a small manifesto of hope destined for children in refugee camps. "Look at this one," Omar said, holding up a letter illustrated with bright crayons. The student who wrote it was only 7, yet had drawn an elaborate picture of 2 hands linking across a globe. "It's amazing how they make something so simple feel so big." Lily nodded, recounting her own grandmother's words. Stories are life rafts. She thought of Tao's faux GA recipe, which she had included in her letter, a handwritten copy on thin rice paper. What if a family in Syria tries that recipe one day? She mused aloud, sealing an envelope. They might taste my grandma's soup and feel a little less afraid. Omar's eyes misted with gratitude. In class, he was quiet, often sketching images of his father's Aleppo clinic. Now, with this letter-writing campaign, he felt connected to something larger than himself, something that gave his worry for his father a sense of purpose rather than paralysis. "I used to think nobody cared," he said softly. "But these kids, everyone, this is proof they do." As they finished packaging the letters, Ms. Rivera entered the classroom with a wide smile. "I've just spoken with a regional coordinator from a nonprofit," she announced. "They're willing to ship your letters to camps in Jordan, Lebanon, and even some places in Eastern Europe." For a moment, Lily and Omar could only stare at her in awe. Lily let out a squeal of excitement, and Omar grinned so broadly that Ms. Rivera almost didn't recognize the usually reserved boy. There was a sense of electricity in the air, like thunderclouds charged with the promise of rain. "And there's more," Ms. Rivera continued. "Principal Harris wants to invite the local press to do a feature on the Sparrow Letters. This might inspire other schools to do the same." Lily caught Omar's eye. In that glance, they both understood. Their small spark was about to become a wider flame. Later that evening, Lily found herself back in her grandmother's kitchen. The familiar swirl of ginger, cilantro, and anise drifted in the steam, rising from a pot of simmering broth. Light from a single overhead bulb cast reflections on the tiled floor, and the aroma of faux GA enveloped the small space in comforting warmth. Tao handed Lily a stack of fresh herbs to rinse. "You look happy, Chowpy," she observed, smiling. Lily could hardly contain her excitement. She rattled off the news. "Omar and I have almost 500 letters now, and Ms. Rivera found a group that'll help ship them. Isn't that incredible, Grandma?" Tao's face lit up with quiet pride. She took a handful of bean sprouts, sprinkling them into a bowl. "When I was your age," she said, "the only letters I ever saw were soldiers' orders. Everyone was scared. Now, you and Omar are sending letters of peace. Chow, that's a good reason to be proud." While Tao continued to cook, Lily shared a story about Amal, an imaginary friend she'd created for the recipients of her letters, or rather, a composite figure she liked to think about. In Lily's mind, Amal was a girl in a refugee camp who opened an envelope, read a letter from Maplewood Elementary, and felt hope stirring inside. The thought made Lily's heart flutter. Sometimes, Lily said, voice dropping to a near whisper, I imagine getting a letter back from her. Wouldn't it be amazing to know this actually helped someone? Tao nodded, pressing a gentle kiss to Lily's forehead. Wars do follow people like shadows, she said softly. But so can kindness. Principal Harris's office. The phone call came in the midst of an otherwise ordinary Wednesday. Principal Harris sat behind his desk, fiddling with the school's budget spreadsheets, when his phone buzzed. The caller ID read, Office of Melania Trump. Immediately, he felt beads of sweat forming on his brow. His mind flashed back to the day Melania had visited Maplewood. He'd been so nervous that his handshake practically trembled. Forcing a confident tone, he answered, Principal Harris speaking. A polite voice on the other end introduced herself as Ms. Kramer, Melania Trump's personal assistant. Mrs. Trump sends her regards, Ms. Kramer said. She'd like to invite Lillian Gwynn and Omar Hassan, along with a faculty chaperone, to New York for a small event she's organizing. It concerns youth initiatives for refugee outreach. Principal Harris's jaw dropped. He asked for details, scribbling them onto a sticky note. Ms. Kramer explained that the event would take place at a cultural center in Manhattan. It would gather a small group of children from various schools who were engaged in meaningful community projects. "We'd be delighted if Lily and Omar could speak about the Sparrow Letters," she said. By the time the call ended, Principal Harris was nearly giddy. He smoothed his tie and immediately called Ms. Rivera down to his office. "Bring Lily and Omar," he said excitedly. "I have big news." Ms. Rivera escorted Lily and Omar into the principal's office, and they both looked wary, like they were unsure if they were in trouble or not. Principal Harris grinned, taking a tissue from his desk to dab at his perpetually sweaty scalp. "Relax, you two," he said. "I have good news." He informed them about the invitation from Melania Trump, and both children gasped. Omar's eyes went wide, and Lily seemed momentarily speechless. She clutched the strap of her backpack, as though seeking an anchor. She wants us to go to New York?" Lily asked, her voice almost squeaking. "Yes," Principal Harris confirmed, beaming. "You'll get to share your letters, maybe even meet other kids doing similar projects. It's a wonderful opportunity." Omar stepped forward, his cheeks flushed. "But how? I mean, my family, we don't really." Principal Harris raised a calming hand. "The school and possibly some private donors will cover your travel expenses. We're sorting out the details with Ms. Kramer as we speak." For a moment, a strange look passed over Omar's face. Part joy, part concern, perhaps a hint of guilt too. Lily placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Your dad'll be proud," she whispered. Omar's home. That evening, Omar returned to his family's modest apartment. His mother was stirring lentil soup in a small pot, and the savory aroma mingled with the hush of evening routines. On the wall, a single photograph showed Omar's father, Dr. Farid Hassan, standing outside his clinic in Aleppo, smiling broadly at the camera. The building in the picture was intact, its walls whitewashed and gleaming in the sun, the sign above the door reading Hassan Medical Services. Omar hung his jacket, then approached his mother with a hesitant grin. "Guess what happened today?" She turned, her eyes reflecting both curiosity and the perpetual worry that never quite left her. "Tell me." He relayed the entire story, from Ms. Rivera's classroom to the principal's big announcement. As he spoke, his mother's eyes glistened. "New York? You'll speak about these letters?" she asked, stirring the soup absent-mindedly. "I know it's a lot," Omar said, "and we have to figure out if I can go, especially with—" He hesitated, glancing at the photo of his father. His mother walked over and pulled Omar into a tight hug. "Your father would want you to do this," she whispered. "You're helping others, and maybe you'll learn something that can help him too." She gestured to the photo on the wall. "He once told me that even a small lamp can guide you in the darkness. Your letters are little lamps, Omar. Let them shine." For the first time in a long while, Omar felt a sense of hope mingling with the ache of missing his dad. He imagined traveling to the big city, telling people about the Sparrow Letters, possibly inspiring others to join. Maybe, somehow, that collective energy could ripple across borders and help bring his father home safely. The next day, they confirmed with Principal Harris that Omar's mother would sign the necessary permission forms. The moment the ink dried, the trip to New York felt real. No longer a distant fantasy, but a tangible event that would happen in less than 2 weeks. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, Melania Trump sat at her polished desk, reviewing the event's itinerary. She had arranged for the Cultural Center to host a Youth Ambassadors of Hope forum. Alongside Lily and Omar, there would be other children, some from local New York schools, others from states as far away as California or Texas. Each had taken on a community project focused on empathy, inclusion, or helping marginalized communities. Scrolling through the list of attendees, Melania noticed a name: Amir, a 10-year-old from a school in Brooklyn who had started a sock drive for homeless shelters. Another was Sasha, a 12-year-old from Seattle who organized a readathon to raise funds for literacy programs in underprivileged areas. It warmed Melania's heart to see so many young people stepping into roles of compassion, often without fanfare or reward. But Lily and Omar's story remained particularly close to her. She kept recalling that day in Maplewood's assembly hall. Lily's trembling question, Omar's guarded eyes. They had taken something as fragile as hope and nurtured it into a real, tangible effort. A single spark can ignite a light in the darkness, she mused. On her desk, the carved wooden sparrow, her father Victor's heirloom, rested in a velvet pouch. She found herself tracing its green-tinted wings, thinking of the painter Milan, whom she had never met but felt connected to through Victor's tales. The sparrow was more than an artifact. It was a living token of resilience. Part of her wanted to gift it to Lily, but another part hesitated. She feared letting go of her father's legacy. Yet wasn't that the point? Stories aren't meant to be locked away. They're meant to be shared. Melania glanced at a framed photograph of her father on the bookcase. It showed Victor in front of a blooming apple orchard, the sunlight catching strands of gray in his hair. Next to it was a more recent photo of her mother, Emilia, smiling proudly in front of the White House rose garden, a memory from a different chapter in Melania's life. She turned her attention back to the event schedule, deciding she would speak personally about the Sparrow Letters. People might expect a polished, cautious speech, but she felt compelled to be more raw and sincere. The children deserved to see vulnerability in leadership, an acknowledgement that grown-ups didn't always have all the answers. Departure day, Maplewood to Manhattan. A week flew by in a whirlwind of excitement and preparations. At last, the morning of the trip arrived. Lily and Gwen barely slept the night before. Visions of skyscrapers, bustling avenues, and a cultural center's auditorium all danced in her mind. She wondered if Omar felt the same anxiety and thrill churned together. They met at Maplewood Elementary before dawn. The sky was a gradient of purple fading into gold. Principal Harris, Ms. Rivera, and a small group of curious classmates stood by the parking lot to send them off. A local news van idled nearby, a reporter snapping pictures of Lily and Omar with their suitcases. Even Tao came, wearing a light jacket and cradling a thermos of hot tea, her warm eyes filled with pride. Remember, Tao whispered to Lily, hugging her tight, carry our stories with you. She pressed a slip of paper into Lily's hand. Another copy of her cherished faux recipe. Hand it to whoever needs it most. Omar's mother stood off to the side, gently gripping her son's backpack straps. Though her smile was proud, tension glimmered in her eyes. She kept glancing at her phone, as if half hoping for a miracle call from Dr. Hassan. Instead, she hugged Omar goodbye and reminded him to stay safe. And, she added with quiet emphasis, if you have a chance to share your father's story, do it. People need to know. Ms. Rivera led Lily and Omar into the school van. It would take them to the train station, where they'd board an Amtrak bound for New York. The morning air was crisp, stirring in Lily a mix of nervous energy. She reached for Omar's hand. He squeezed back, a tacit acknowledgement that they were stepping into a bigger world, together. Hours later, the skyline of Manhattan rose on the horizon like a jagged sculpture. Lily's heart pounded. She had seen pictures of Times Square's neon chaos and the Empire State Building's grandeur, but seeing them loom in real life felt surreal. Omar leaned forward in his seat, eyes widening at the sheer volume of yellow cabs zipping through the streets. Wow, Ms. Rivera breathed from the seat behind them, adjusting her glasses. This place is intense. The traffic crawled, horns blaring in a discordant symphony. Billboards and storefronts flashed by in a blur of color. Lily pressed her palm to the window, feeling like a tiny sparrow dropped into a vast steel forest. When they finally arrived at the modest hotel near Midtown, Ms. Rivera checked them in. The hotel lobby dazzled with marble floors and potted palms. Lily and Omar huddled together, unsure whether to marvel or feel overwhelmed. A doorman tipped his hat politely, and Lily shyly smiled back. That evening, they ate pizza in a small diner, Omar's first taste of New York-style slices, dripping with melted cheese. The city roared beyond the windows, a ceaseless tide of activity. Lily's phone buzzed every few minutes with texts from classmates wishing them luck. She giggled at one from her friend Aiden, who wrote, "Take a selfie with the Statue of Liberty if you can." Ms. Rivera reminded them that tomorrow was the big event at the Cultural Center. "We'll meet Mrs. Trump's team at 10 a.m., she said, consulting the itinerary. "Then you two will have some time to explore an exhibit on global art made by children your age. After lunch, there'll be a small forum where you'll speak about the Sparrow Letters." Omar swallowed hard. He had grown used to the idea of the letters, but speaking in front of strangers about them felt daunting. Still, he clenched his hands into fists under the table, recalling how his father had braved bombed-out streets to treat the wounded. If his father could do that, Omar could handle this. While Lily and Omar settled into their New York hotel, half a world away, on a quiet night in Slovenia, an older man stood at the edge of an apple orchard. Moonlight bathed the blossoms, illuminating the gentle slopes of the Sava River Valley. The man was Victor Novs, Melania Trump's father, leaning on his cane, reliving memories that still tugged at his heart. In the hush of night, the orchard sang with crickets and the distant gurgle of the river. Victor closed his eyes and remembered the day he first returned to this land after World War II. He had walked among the charred stumps of trees, his mother, Marjana, by his side, determined to replant what the war had destroyed. Together, they had dug the earth and placed young saplings, watering them with tears and hope. A faint rustle in the darkness startled Victor. A sparrow hopped across a low branch, wings twitching in the pale light. Victor smiled, recalling the day Lodge the carpenter gave him that first wooden sparrow. He ran his fingers over the smooth cane handle. He had carved it himself, decades ago, with a pattern of leaves and birds. Everything he touched, he tried to imbue with the resilience Lodge once taught him. His phone chimed in his jacket pocket. A text from Melania lit the screen, telling him that the youth forum in New York was ready and children from Maplewood Elementary were coming to present. Victor's heart swelled with pride. So the sparrow takes wing again, he thought. He typed back, slowly but carefully. "I send my blessings from Sevnica. Let them all know that even the smallest seeds of peace can take root." With a sigh, Victor leaned against the trunk of the nearest apple tree, savoring the night's calm. Perhaps it was just an old man's dream, but he wished these children, Lily, Omar, and others, would inherit a world without the terrors he had witnessed. If only wars could remain a memory and not a recurring nightmare. The next morning, Lily and Omar, accompanied by Ms. Rivera, stepped into the grand atrium of the Cultural Center. High glass walls allowed sunshine to cascade over intricate displays of sculptures, paintings, and photos, all created by children from conflict zones around the world. Lily stopped at a series of hauntingly beautiful drawings by a girl in Sudan. Swirling lines of pastel crayons depicting dusty landscapes, huts set ablaze, and yet, in the midst of the destruction, hands joined in a circle. Omar paused at a painting by a boy from Ukraine, the strokes bold and somber, showing a child waving goodbye to a father in uniform. A small placard explained that the boy's father had not returned from the front lines. Both Lily and Omar felt chills course through them. Each piece of art seemed to say, "We feel your pain, but we also believe in something better." They walked around until they found an entire wall dedicated to letters of hope. The curators had pen-typed or handwritten letters from children in refugee camps or kids who had faced displacement. Some were decorated with bird stickers or simple line drawings. Omar recognized a few lines of Arabic in one letter, where a child named Sarah wrote, "I just want my father back home." Lily's hand found Omar's again. She felt his breath hitch, and she squeezed gently. This was the world they were trying to touch with the Sparrow Letters, a world where heartbreak was shared in 1,000 different languages. Suddenly, a soft voice spoke from behind them. "It's powerful, isn't it?" They turned to find Melania Trump, elegantly dressed, but with an approachable warmth in her expression. Beside her stood Ms. Kramer, the personal assistant who had arranged their trip. Melania gestured to the wall of letters, her gaze distant and pensive. "Thank you for coming," Melania said, shifting her focus to Lily and Omar. I'm glad you could see these before you speak. Lily felt her palms sweat. It's incredible, she managed, unable to tear her eyes away from the letters. All these stories from kids who just want the same things we do. Family, friends, peace. Melania nodded, her voice gentle. That's why your Sparrow Letters are so important. You're creating connections that might not otherwise exist. She paused, then added, please call me Melania. Mrs. Trump feels too formal today. Ms. Rivera, stepping forward, introduced herself properly and expressed gratitude for the invitation. Melania shook her hand warmly, then turned back to the children. You have about an hour to explore. Then we'll meet in the main hall for the forum. I've invited some guests who might want to help distribute even more of your letters. Maybe you can share your story. Omar swallowed, his eyes darting to Ms. Rivera. I'm not sure if I'll say the right words, he admitted. I've never spoken to an audience before. Melania's gaze softened. The right words are your words, she said. Share your heart. That's enough. Just before the forum began, Lily's phone buzzed. It was a text from Principal Harris, accompanied by a short video clip. She clicked play, and the screen showed Tao in their kitchen, wearing an apron splattered with broth. A wide grin stretched across her face as she held up a ladle of steaming pho. Lily, Tao said in Vietnamese, which Principal Harris had helpfully subtitled in English. Here's the soup you wanted me to show the world. I'm sending a taste of Vietnam to New York, through the screen, through you. Be brave, Chow Bi. She kissed the ladle and raised it in a symbolic toast. Lily felt tears prick her eyes. She handed the phone to Omar, who read the subtitles and smiled. Your grandma is so cool, he whispered. Lily laughed through her tears, nodding in agreement. In that moment, her nerves settled. She felt stronger, somehow, imagining that every spoonful of Tao's pho carried stories of survival and generosity, dating back to when Saigon fell, and yet hope endured. She clutched the slip of paper with the recipe, vowing to share it if the right moment came. As the group gathered backstage, Melania approached Lily and Omar with a small velvet pouch in hand. She hesitated, then held it out. Inside is a carving my father, Victor, has carried since his childhood, an old wooden sparrow with green wings. He gave it to me. It's precious. Lily and Omar looked at her in awe, sensing the significance. The piece within that pouch was more than just wood. It was a relic of survival, born of Victor's experiences during World War II. Lily gently opened the pouch, revealing the sparrow. Its wings had the faintest tint of sage green, and the carving lines were worn smooth in places. When you speak, Melania said, her voice almost a whisper, hold it if you need courage. My father used to say, fear is loud, but courage is quieter. Listen for it. This sparrow reminds me of that. Omar blinked, speechless at the gesture. Lily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Thank you, she managed. She shut the pouch carefully, feeling the weight of both history and responsibility. Melania placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, then on Omar's. Remember, your stories matter. Let them fly. The stage was set in a mid-sized auditorium within the cultural center. Rows of seats filled quickly with educators, nonprofit representatives, and other children who had come to share their own community efforts. At the podium, a sign read, Youth Ambassadors of Hope, Building Bridges Through Stories. Melania Trump stood at the podium first, giving a brief, heartfelt introduction. She spoke of her father's experiences in Slovenia during World War II, of how small acts of compassion, like hiding partisans in attics or sharing bread, had saved lives. Her voice trembled slightly when she mentioned how easy it was for war to become a child's only memory, yet how extraordinary it was that children could still dream of peace. Then she invited Lily and Omar to the stage. Applause rippled through the auditorium as they stepped up, Lily clutching the velvet pouch. The bright stage lights felt overwhelming, but Ms. Rivera, seated in the front row, gave them an encouraging nod. Lily cleared her throat, heart hammering in her chest. She looked at the crowd, strangers, reporters, fellow students, and inhaled sharply. I can do this, she told herself. For Grandma, for Omar, for all the kids who need hope. Hello, she began, her voice quivering. My name is Lily Nguyen, and this is my friend, Omar Hassan. We come from Maplewood Elementary in Pennsylvania. We'd like to share a project called the Sparrow Letters. It started with a single question: how can kids stop wars? A silence fell over the crowd, as though every adult in the room was collectively holding their breath. Omar took a shaky step forward. My father is in Aleppo, Syria, trying to help people injured by the war. I was afraid no one cared. His gaze dropped to the floor. Then he remembered Melania's words, and he clutched the podium. But Lily helped me see that our stories can connect us, that we don't have to feel alone. Lily continued, fighting back tears. We began writing letters with our classmates, sharing recipes, drawings, poems, anything that might bring hope to kids in refugee camps or kids displaced by fighting. We call them Sparrow Letters because sparrows survive storms. They're small, but they endure. She opened a velvet pouch and held up Victor's sparrow for the audience to see. Its green-tinted wings glinted under the stage lights. This carving has been through war, too. It reminds us that stories are carried forward by each generation, and so is courage. Omar gently placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, steadying her as she trembled. We don't have political power or big money, he said, but we have words. We've sent hundreds of letters so far, and we plan to keep going. He paused, voice almost breaking, because somewhere a child like me is waiting for hope. The auditorium was still for a heartbeat that felt eternal. Then applause exploded, echoing off the walls. Lily and Omar exhaled together, tears in their eyes, as Ms. Rivera shot them a thumbs up. Backstage, Melania closed her eyes, feeling a swell of emotion. The children's raw sincerity had struck a chord. This is it, she thought, the reason we keep telling stories, the reason we pass on small birds with green wings. She recalled her father's orchard, the shape of scars on Marjana's arms, and the many nights she herself felt overshadowed by the world's chaos. In this moment, she felt the hush of quiet courage. The standing ovation thundered in Lily's ears, sending a rush of warmth through her body. As she and Omar stepped away from the podium, they were both trembling, partly from adrenaline, partly from relief. In the backstage hallway, Ms. Rivera enveloped them in a tight hug, practically bouncing on her toes with excitement. "You were incredible," she exclaimed, tears of pride in her eyes. "And do you see how many people want to talk to you already?" Peeking out from behind the curtain, Lily noticed a small crowd forming near the stage exit. Reporters, organizers, other children who had just watched them speak. Some faces were streaked with tears, others shone with wide grins of admiration. Omar's hand squeezed Lily's in a moment of shared awe. Neither of them had ever been the center of so much attention. Ms. Kramer, Melania's assistant, appeared with a gentle knock on the backstage door. "People would love a quick interview, if you're up for it," she said, smiling encouragingly. "Then Mrs. Trump has arranged a small reception, so you can meet some potential partners for the Sparrow Letters initiative." Omar stiffened at the word interview, his shyness flaring. Lily, equally nervous, drew in a calming breath. "We come this far," she thought. "We can do this, too." Together, they nodded. The Cultural Center's side hall had been transformed into a modest reception area, with folding tables draped in white cloth. Attendees milled around, nibbling on hors d'oeuvres. Posters on the walls showcased child-led projects from all over the country. Sock drives, food collections, art therapy programs, each one a testament to youthful determination in the face of adversity. A small local news crew interviewed Omar and Lily first. The reporter asked Omar how it felt to share such a personal story about his father. Omar's voice wavered for an instant, but then steadied. "I'm afraid for him every day," he admitted. "But the Sparrow Letters remind me I'm not alone. I think maybe if enough of us care, something will change." Lily's turn came next. The reporter inquired about Tao's faux recipe, why it kept showing up in so many of Lily's letters. Lily grinned. "Soup is about sharing, right? My grandma fed strangers during the Vietnam War. She believed peace starts when we realize we can feed each other, literally and emotionally." She held up the slip of paper. "It's not just broth and noodles. It's a story of survival and kindness passed down through generations. When the interviews wrapped, Ms. Rivera guided the kids to a circle of nonprofit representatives who had set up small display boards and brochures. One was Mrs. Lane, an older woman from an NGO called Paths of Peace. Her eyes sparkled when Lily and Omar approached. "I've worked in refugee camps in Jordan," Mrs. Lane said, shaking their hands warmly. "Your letters have been making waves there. We've seen kids reading them under tents, tracing the drawings with their fingertips. Some are writing back. We'd love to expand the program. Maybe set up pen pal pairings." Lily nearly squealed. They wrote back. Mrs. Lane nodded, reaching into her satchel. She produced a handful of letters scrawled in careful English, Arabic, or even pictures. One child had painted a heart made of lilac flowers. Another had drawn a nurse bandaging a wounded soldier. Omar swallowed hard, tears brimming in his eyes. In a corner of one letter, a shaky script read, "I pray your father comes home." Across the room, Melania approached with a thick envelope in her hand. "Lily, Omar," she said, "I want you to see something that arrived in my office yesterday. It's from a girl named Amal in a Jordanian camp. She heard about the Sparrow Letters through an NGO. They gave her paper and crayons to respond." Omar carefully pulled out the pages. The first sheet featured a hand-drawn sparrow and scrawled Arabic text. Someone had provided a translation on a sticky note. "Sparrows fly across borders. We must be like them." The next page showed what looked like a family portrait. 2 parents, 2 children, all smiling, all labeled in neat Arabic letters. At the bottom, a single line read, "My father is missing too." Omar's voice shook as he read the note. Lily placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. He thought of his father, Dr. Hassan, who might be huddled in a damaged clinic right now, hearing distant explosions. Yet halfway across the globe, another child lived that same reality and had chosen to reach out in solidarity. "She's waiting for our reply," Melania said softly. "We can help ensure she gets it." This is how it begins, connections one letter at a time. All around them, it seemed as if intangible barriers melted away. Kids who had never met swapped email addresses, phone numbers, and social media handles. Nonprofits discussed how to streamline letter exchanges, translating them into different languages. Over cups of orange juice and trays of fruit skewers, ideas poured forth like a fast-flowing river. Lily and Omar circulated through the crowd, collecting more contacts. A teacher from California described how her students wanted to send artwork to orphans in Nigeria. A volunteer from a Michigan church group offered to sponsor postage for hundreds of letters. Ms. Rivera hovered nearby, scribbling notes in a small planner, her eyes shining with possibility. At one point, Omar spotted a familiar face from the news, an older Syrian-American doctor who had once spoken publicly about the crisis in Aleppo. Gathering his courage, Omar approached the man and introduced himself. When the doctor heard about Omar's father, he pressed a supportive hand to Omar's shoulder. "I know some staff at humanitarian agencies," he said. "Maybe we can find a way to get updates on your father's clinic." Omar's chest tightened with a mix of gratitude and longing. A single spark, he thought again, can start a chain reaction. As the reception began to wind down, Melania guided Lily and Omar into a quiet side alcove, away from the bustling main hall. A large window overlooked New York's skyline, blue sky dotted with clouds that glowed orange in the late afternoon sun. Melania hesitated for a moment, then handed the velvet pouch back to Lily. "I asked you to hold on to Victor's sparrow for courage when you spoke," she said. "But there's something else I'd like to do." Omar glanced at Lily, both unsure of what Melania meant. Gently, Melania removed the wooden sparrow from its pouch. She held it in her palm, its green wings catching a beam of sunlight. "This sparrow has journeyed from Slovenia to Manhattan, across decades of hope and fear," she began. "My father gave it to me to remind me of his childhood, of the resilience born in wartime. Now, I want it to continue its journey." She reached out and placed the carving in Omar's hand, folding his fingers around it. Then she placed her other hand over Lily's. "I'm not saying give it to one person or keep it for yourselves. Rather, let it be shared, passed among children who need it most. Let it gather more stories, more fingerprints. One day, when you feel the time is right, pass it on again. Omar gazed down at the sparrow, overwhelmed. Lily's eyes brimmed with tears. Are you sure? Lily whispered. This is part of your father's life. Melania nodded. He asked me to share it with those who carry hope forward. He survived under fascist occupation as a child. She looked at them both. You are surviving in a world still fractured by conflicts. The sparrow belongs where hope is being renewed. Omar gently clasped the carving, feeling the smooth wood warm against his skin. Lily murmured a soft, thank you, her heart pounding with the enormity of the gift. Before they parted, Melania's expression grew earnest. Never forget the weight of war, even when you work for peace, she said. My father's stories taught me that conflict is easy to start but hard to end. You're doing something beautiful, but be prepared for challenges. Skeptics, bureaucracy, even people who might exploit your hope. Lily and Omar exchanged glances, absorbing the warning. We won't give up, Omar said quietly, remembering bombed-out Aleppo streets. Melania smiled, though her eyes held both warmth and a trace of sorrow. That is what matters, she said. The next day, Lily and Omar boarded the train back to Pennsylvania. Ms. Rivera dozed in the seat behind them, the gentle rocking of the carriage lulling her to sleep. Through the window, Manhattan's skyline gradually shrank, replaced by rolling fields and the occasional glimpse of autumn trees. They spoke in hushed tones, flipping through the letters they had gathered. Amal's letter, the ones from Mrs. Lane, the half-finished reply they wanted to send back to the Jordanian camp. Omar traced the Arabic script with reverence. Lily reread the recipe from Tao, imagining how a refugee family might make pho with whatever ingredients they had. Between them, carefully nestled in a zipped pocket of Omar's backpack, lay Victor's wooden sparrow. I still can't believe we have it, Omar murmured. It feels so important. Lily nodded, her gaze far away. My grandma always said every war has countless stories of people saving each other. That's what we're doing, in our own small way. They fell into a comfortable silence. Outside, the train tracks clacked steadily, and the setting sun painted the horizon pink and gold. Lily found herself breathing easier, as if a weight had lifted. She thought about how the Sparrow Letters had begun, just a trembling question in the school assembly. Now, it had blossomed into something bigger than she'd ever imagined, an entire network of children connecting across borders. When they arrived at Maplewood Elementary, it was nearly dusk. Principal Harris was waiting in the parking lot, along with a small cluster of students and parents holding handmade signs. Welcome back, Lily and Omar. A cheer went up when they stepped off the van. Aiden, Lily's friend, rushed forward. We watched the live stream online. You guys were amazing, he shouted, practically bouncing on his toes. Your story is on local news sites, too. Lily blushed. The idea of her face on a news site was surreal. Omar offered a shy smile, noticing his mother in the crowd, her face lit with relief and pride. She wrapped him in a hug, tears glistening. I saw the speech, Habibi. I'm so proud. Lily's grandmother Tao also greeted them, hugging Lily tight. Did you share the recipe? She teased, pulling Lily's phone out of her pocket to check photos. Lily laughed, showing her a snapshot of the actual typed recipe pinned to a display. Yes, Grandma. And people loved it. Later that night, after everyone dispersed, Lily settled with Tao at the kitchen table. A single lamp threw golden light across a plate of fresh spring rolls. The older woman took Lily's hand in hers. Your grandpa would be proud, Tao said softly. Lily tilted her head, surprised. She rarely heard about her grandfather. He had been lost during the chaos after the fall of Saigon. Do you think so? She asked. Tao nodded, stirring her tea. He believed in small kindnesses, too. During the war, he hid neighbors in our attic when soldiers came searching. We had almost nothing, but he shared every grain of rice. Now you're sharing letters and soup recipes. You carry his spirit. A lump formed in Lily's throat. She felt the echo of history vibrating through her, from her grandparents' generation to her own efforts with Omar. Wars follow people like shadows, she remembered Tao saying, but so can kindness. Within days, Maplewood Elementary was awash in new projects. More students wanted to join the Sparrow Letters campaign. Ms. Rivera struggled to keep pace with the volume of envelopes piling up, so Aiden organized an after-school club to handle sorting and packaging. Donations rolled in: stamps, stationery, art supplies. Local businesses pitched in with small grants. A local tech entrepreneur even offered to help digitize the letter exchange for faster connections. Word spread beyond Maplewood. Schools from neighboring towns emailed Ms. Rivera, asking how they could start their own Sparrow Letters initiatives. Some teachers even proposed Zoom calls between classrooms in the U.S. and abroad, letting students read each other's letters in real time. Omar and Lily found themselves at the center of this growing movement. Two kids who had once felt overshadowed by forces far beyond their control. Now, they were ambassadors, bridging gaps that adults often left unaddressed. Each letter they shipped became a promise. You are not forgotten. Each letter they received was a testament. We are still here. One chilly afternoon, Omar's phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. He opened it, his breath catching when he saw the Syrian country code. His eyes darted anxiously across the text, heart pounding. Then he let out a soft cry that brought Lily, Ms. Rivera, and Aiden running over. It's from someone who worked with my dad. Omar explained, tears slipping down his cheeks. He says Dad is still treating patients at the clinic. He's safe for now. They patched a phone call through from a medical volunteer. They said my father wants me to keep sending those letters, that they're giving people hope. Lily felt goosebumps prick her arms. Ms. Rivera placed a hand over her mouth, eyes misting. Aiden practically shouted, "He's okay?" That's amazing. For Omar, it felt like the biggest gulp of fresh air he had taken in years. The fear of never hearing news again receded just a little. In its place bloomed a renewed resolve. "We won't stop," he whispered, scanning the text again. "Not until this war ends, or any war." Lily squeezed his hand. "A small lamp can guide you in the darkness," Dr. Hassan had once told his family. The Sparrow Letters were that lamp now, shining across thousands of miles. Slovenia, Victor's orchard revisited. At dawn in Sevnica, Victor Novs ambled through his orchard, leaning on his handmade cane. Apple blossoms drifted on the breeze, and he paused to savor the gentle hush of the morning. His phone chirped, another text from Melania, this time containing a photograph of Lily and Omar. They stood in a crowded gym, arms linked with classmates, each holding up envelopes decorated with hand-drawn sparrows. Victor's eyes misted as he read Melania's note. They carry the sparrow forward, Papa. The seeds you planted in war-torn soil are blossoming elsewhere. The children have become the messengers of hope. He traced a carved bird on his cane handle, remembering Lodge, the carpenter who once taught him that sparrows survive storms by staying small and by refusing to give up flight. War had not disappeared from the world. He knew that too well. But in these young hands, in their letters, in the soups and sketches and prayers they sent across oceans, there was a quiet rebellion against despair. Maplewood Elementary, a new harvest. Months later, as autumn leaves curled around the playground of Maplewood Elementary, Lily and Omar stood by a new bulletin board titled Global Pen Pals. Photographs cover the surface, smiling kids in refugee camps holding up letters. A group of Maplewood students reading replies in Arabic and Spanish, even a black and white photo of Victor's orchard with a short paragraph in Slovenian welcoming them to Sevnica one day. In the center of the board, pinned with a bright red thumbtack, was the faux recipe from Tao, translated into 6 languages now. Next to it, another slip of paper bore lines of Omar's father's handwriting, praising the children for their compassion and resilience. There are pictures of homemade sparrow carvings crafted by Maplewood's Woodworking Club, each one a variation on Victor's original design. At a nearby table, Ms. Rivera and Aiden sorted through yet another batch of letters. Principal Harris, less sweaty these days, looked on with pride. The story of Lily and Omar had brought a fresh sense of purpose to the entire school and even the broader community. Lily scrolled through her phone, smiling at the latest message from Amal. An audio clip of the little Jordanian girl singing a lullaby her grandmother once sang to her. The melody was haunting and serene, bridging the distance between them. Lily pressed play again, eyes closed, letting the foreign words wash over her. So can kindness, she thought, recalling her grandmother's mantra. Even if war lurked at the edges of their world, it would never extinguish the light they were passing on, one letter at a time. Omar sat beside her, flipping through a spiral notebook where he drafted designs for a new art piece. This one of two sparrows flying side by side over a torn map, stitching it together with a ribbon that read peace. He smiled shyly at Lily when she glanced over. "I'll send it to Amal," he said. "Let her color it in." Lily nodded. "And one day," she added, "we'll all color in a world without bombs or fear. A place where shadows of war are replaced by the brightness of all these tiny acts of hope." High above Maplewood Elementary, a small flock of sparrows darted across the sky. Maybe they were just birds, following their natural patterns, or maybe they carried echoes of countless stories. Stories of victor carving wood under wartime duress, of Taos stirring soup in the midst of conflict, of Dr. Hassan saving lives in a broken city, of children in a Jordanian camp sending letters back with trembling but hopeful hands. And maybe, just maybe, each letter that flew across the seas bore a silent pledge. Fear is loud, but courage is quieter. Listen for it.